Good. I'm very glad that you all are here tonight. That is for our emerging scholar talk. I am very sorry that we have the problem with the link, but I'm very happy that all of you found us here, and I'm really glad to introduce here Tina Rassal, because I know her since her first year at UNC when she started here in 2014, and it feels like a short time that she started, but actually it was quite some years, and you will hear and see today what she has done in her time at UNC. Just a couple of weeks ago, she defended her dissertation. She is not only, as you will hear, an archaeologist and does research on coins, as you will hear, but she also writes, and she is a video gamer. So I think there's many more topics Tina can cover. Her work concentrates on the intersection of religious material culture and the archaeology of the ancient Near East, with a focus on ancient Judaism and early Christianity. She currently teaches several classes, for instance, the UNC Friday Center, and also she's currently teaching Dutch in my own department of Germanic and Slavic languages and literatures. But today I'm very happy that Tina will share with us her research on coin deposits from ancient synagogues in late antique Palestine.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Shall we switch screens here? I will share mine. Okay. See if this works. Everyone can see this? Okay, great, thank you. So hello everyone, and thank you so much for having me tonight. And like Ruth said, it's great to be back at the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies, a place that has become very close to my heart over the last 7 years. 7 years ago, the center offered me their first Tau Epsilon Pi graduate student fellowship in Jewish Studies, and the chance for me to come to the US to pursue my doctoral degree. Without them, it would be very clear to say that I would not have been here, and I would not have had the chance to meet all the wonderful colleagues at the Department of Religious Studies where I'm at, as well as my Jewish Studies colleagues across campus. And like Ruth said, as I defended my dissertation a couple of weeks ago, and I have come now to the end of my journey here at UNC, it feels only appropriate to come full circle and present my research to all of you. So again, I want to thank the Jewish Center from the bottom of my heart for everything that they've done for me. It's really been a great journey. So let's go. Okay, so this is the enigma that inspired my dissertation research. Over the past century or so, archaeologists excavating in Israel or Palestine have been uncovering hundreds of ancient synagogue buildings dated somewhere between the 3rd and 7th century CE, also called late antiquity in this region. These buildings form the nucleus of thousands of Jewish communities that lived in Byzantine Palestine, as it was then called, offering the communities a space to pray, worship, reflect, but also a space to lodge visitors, to teach classes, to organize feasts and events, and to basically use as a communal space in the same way as any modern community hall would be doing. Not two of these hundreds of synagogues look exactly the same, but they all have certain features in common. First of all, the synagogues were always built of nicely carved stones called ashlars, often on the highest top of the village or in the middle of it, making the building distinctively different from the houses around it. Inside, the walls would be lined with stone benches, so the visitors would be facing the middle of the building, and columns and pillars would divide the space in a nave and some side aisles and hold up a roof or a second floor. The floors themselves would be covered with pavements or colorful mosaics, and the walls are often colorfully painted. The most sacred space within the building was the Torah shrine, a wooden or a stone platform that would support the cabinet that houses the Torah scrolls. And then a separate platform called the bima would form a second podium for the priests or the lecturer, the rabbi, to lead the community from. Okay, so this is the mystery that we're going to talk about. In 1968, archaeologists started to excavate the famous synagogue at Capernaum on the northern tip of the Lake of Galilee. When they started taking out some of the pavement floor stones to look for datable pottery underneath the building, they instead discovered hundreds and hundreds of little bronze coins hidden underneath the stones. In the end, and they still left many stones in place, they actually collected over 24,000 single stones from under the synagogue building. And clearly this is a lot more coins than someone would lose by accident because it was dropped out of their pocket or something. So that's a mystery. So over the next decades, many more examples of this phenomenon of hiding coins underneath synagogue floors were discovered. On top of that, groups of coins were also started to be found hidden inside the walls of synagogues or behind their benches or inside the Bima platform. And by the year 2000, a list with over 20 synagogue buildings could be generated in which these coin hoards have been found. So clearly this was a sort of widespread phenomenon or habit that existed in late antique Palestine. But the question is why? Why were coins stashed inside and especially underneath these buildings? Written sources from that time period do not discuss the phenomenon. Not one text, rabbinic or otherwise, speaks of placing coins inside the synagogue building. And archaeologists and historians have thus no clue what is going on. And so this is where my project stepped in. So up until this point, archaeologists have known of the phenomenon, but they never placed all of the information that we have on these coin hoards together in one place. So I started my project by going through all of the excavation reports of late antique synagogues published over the last century, looking for coins. And so in the end, I found 24 different buildings and 57 separate coin hoards, which I call coin deposits to stay neutral in terminology, within those buildings. So some buildings had multiple different coin hoards stashed in there. And here you can see a map that I made of where all of these buildings are located. 22 buildings were located within Israel itself, and 2 synagogues with coin deposits could be found in the diaspora. One in Ostia in Italy and one in Sardis in Turkey. So after all of that, I started collecting all the information that I could find on each deposit and place them together in a database. I basically started a catalog in which I entered all of the archaeological and historical background information that we have on each deposit. For example, where inside the building the deposit was exactly found, how many coins it contained, if the coins were placed inside a container like a box or a clay vessel or not, etc. On top of that, I also wanted to look at the information of each single coin within those deposits. It was my hope that if I had all the information I could find on these deposits, I could finally start to make some interpretations of why they were there. So after I built my collection of all deposits, in 2019, I flew to Israel to also see all of the coins for myself. In the end, I was able to have information on no less than 44,254 single coins found in synagogue deposits, which I all entered into my database. And not all of them were legible. So the 44,000 coins, I have about 10,000 coins that I have full information on. My next step was then to put all of this information in a data processing software program. In my case, I used Tableau, to try to see if I could find different groupings within those deposits. So my question was, scholars in the past have always been trying to find one overarching explanation for all of these different deposits, one specific reason for why coin deposits were brought inside the building. But my first question was, is this true? Are all of these deposits the same? And so do they all have the same function? Or do we have different phenomena going on at the same time? So having looked at all the deposits, I quickly came to understand that trying to find one overarching explanation was not possible. There are just too many differences between every single deposit individually. So instead, I decided to group them all according to 3 different criteria. So the first way, I split them up according to the way in which the coins were placed, or what I call the description of the deposit. So there are 2 possible options. The coins are either placed close together, which I call clustered deposits, or the coins are spread out over a larger surface, which I called a scattered deposit. The second way I organized them was according to their permanency. Some deposits were namely irretrievable, as in one would have to partly destroy the building to get to them, such as the coins below the floors or inside the walls. And clearly these kinds of coins were meant to stay within the building forever. Other deposits, however, were found in places that were accessible, like inside the bima. I call them open deposits because you can interact with them, or the users of the building could interact with them. They could add coins to them and take coins out of them whenever, very easily. And the last and most complicated category was according to its function. And this is what I spend the most time on. Researching the socio-historical and economic circumstances of Jewish society in late antiquity, I came up with 7 possible functions for why these deposits could have been placed. And I believe all of our deposits fall under one of those 7 options. So the groups are accidental losses, votive offerings stored in gnizot, charity hoards, also called sadaqah, treasuries, emergency hoards, magical religious deposits connecting to tithing, and post-destruction offerings. So based on these categories, I created a sort of mix and match system in which each of the 57 deposits could be placed. So this system is a lot more flexible, and it also leaves space for ambiguity, as any of the categorical numbers can be replaced with a question mark if we don't know that specific grouping. So it's a much more flexible system compared to what people have been trying to do in the past, where each has to fit one specific group. Okay, so I think it's clear that it can be relatively easy to determine how the coins were buried, scattered or clustered, and if the deposits could have been easily accessed by the users of the synagogue building or not. The problem, however, lays in its interpretation. And so in the second half of my presentation now, I want to say something a little bit more about the 7 categories that I came up with, and why I believe that they are our only options. So in this slide, you can see a brief summary of each category that I made. Well, let's start with the first category, accidental losses. Accidental coin losses are coins that were inadvertently dropped and never recovered by their owner or anyone else. They were lost by chance and thus were not purposely placed inside the synagogue context for a specific goal. They have no inherent function. And so to be clear, thousands of coins have been found in all ancient synagogues, but most of them can indeed be interpreted as accidental losses, a coin here and there, discovered as single specimens in fills or in foundation trenches or in destruction debris. They can be recognized not only because they appear by themselves and not really clustered, but also frequently because they do not make sense in their archaeological context. For example, a coin found in a drainage pipe or in a wrong stratigraphical layer, for example, a Islam coin found on a Roman floor. So in this database, none of my deposits would fall under this category. This category is known for the explanation. So the rest of the categories is what I believe are deliberate deposits fall under. So the second category are the votive offerings. So a votive offering or a votive deposit is an object displayed in a sacred place for broadly religious purposes without the intention of recovery, often but not necessarily to fulfill a vow or to gain favor with supernatural forces. Votive offerings are mostly known to us from classical cultures, ancient Greek and Romans, but they appear pretty much in any culture or religion around the world. We know that votives were offered in ancient synagogues as well. Josephus, he tells us how the successors of Antiochus Epiphanes gave to the synagogue at Antioch the votive offerings he had taken from the Jerusalem temple, and they were laid up in the synagogue for display. We also know that votive offerings of coins were not uncommon in the ancient Mediterranean world. Coins had images on them of emperors, gods, communal buildings, or military themes, and they were thus fitting objects for rulers to donate as propaganda. It is thus conceivable that votive coins were deposited in synagogues as well, either by its users to fulfill a vow or to give thanks, or by its leaders to show the dominance of the ruler. However, it is difficult to identify any coins in ancient synagogues deposits as votive offerings. If they were not removed from the place where they put up on display on the inside the building before the building was abandoned or destroyed, we would not recognize them. They would just be single coins that we will recognize and called lost coins. We do know that according to Jewish law, ritual objects, especially when containing writing or the name of God, could not be destroyed but need to be deposited in a storage space called a geniza. Thus, coins used as votive offerings would probably make their way into these genizot. They cannot go back into economic circulation. They have been earmarked as belonging to the synagogue space. And so in these genizot, they would be accompanied by other disposed artifacts that were used in ritual aspects of the synagogue. So if we would have to describe how we would recognize these particular coins in the archaeological records, then I believe that there are 4 characteristics a coin deposit should have in order to make it a geniza deposit. First of all, the number of the coins is low. Each specific coin fulfilled a distinctive role. You do not just put 30 coins as an offer, as a votive offering there. Second, the deposit is accessible because as Geniza, you want to keep adding coins to them, so you can't put them under the floor. 3, the coins are mixed with other objects that were also disposed of. And 4, the deposit is found in a symbolic or a distinctive location within the synagogue. So often a geniza is kept, for example, within the bima itself. So it's a very purposefully placed context. Okay, the next category I believe some deposits fall under is tzedakah or charity giving, a prominent concern of the sages who authored the classical rabbinic literature between the 2nd and the 7th century CE. According to their Tanaim texts, everyone who was able was obliged to regularly give money to a charity supervisor who was an unpaid voluntary official, who was then responsible for overseeing the operations of the kupa or the fund. But where would this charity fund be stored? I believe several of our synagogue deposits could have been the local community's charities fund. In this case, I suggest that there are 5 qualities a coin deposit should have in order to make it a candidate for a tzedakah deposit. 1, the coins are found together, part of a group, your savings. 2, the deposit can be found in a retrievable, accessible place. So again, you have to add coins to it and take from it to use this for charity. 3, the deposit must mostly contain small, low-value coins because that's the money that people had in their pockets and were willing to donate to the synagogue. 4, the quantity of the coins is low as they were intended for distribution rather than long-term storage. The overhaul was fast. And 5, the coins are all more or less of the same date because the money would change hands quickly. It was never stored for too long in the kupa, so you basically have a snapshot on what was the last collection plate that went around of the coins of that time. Okay, synagogue was also an economic center in its local community. It had personnel, it organized events and festivities, it acted as a hostel for visitors, etc. All these activities required money. So rabbinic sources inform us that individuals would donate money not only for the construction of the building, but also later on for its upkeep and its use. The synagogue could also have served as a community bank. Profits made by the community as a whole, inheritance money, or other sources of communal income could have been flowing to the synagogue. And all this money again needed to be stored somewhere inside the building. And just as with the kupa, these deposits could have been kept in a stone or a wooden box, in a clay vessel, or any other receptacle within the building. So in this case, I suggest that there are 6 qualities that any excavated coin deposit should have in order to make it a candidate for a treasury deposit. First, just as the kupa, the coins have to be found together as a group. Second, just as the kupa, the deposit is found in an open, accessible place so that you can add coins to it and take them from. But besides small bronze coins, coins of higher value, for example, silver and gold coins, may be represented, because large amount of lower currency is hard to keep, and so you would exchange it into higher currency so that you can save it there. It would take up less space, and then you can keep it in case of an emergency when you need to renovate the roof, for example. The quantity of the coins can be high in this case because you could save up money over a long period of time if you have planned renovations coming up. 5, the coins can have a broad date range. So again, if you're storing up something for a long time and only now and then you take out something for your personnel, coins could have been in there for a long time. And 6, the deposit was stored in a secured place, often in a side room or inside the bima, to prevent this large group of coins to be stolen. Our next category are emergency hoards. Emergency hoards are deposits in which the coins were not deliberately selected, but they consist of what was on hand when a crisis arose that created the impulse to hide coins in the hopes of retrieving them again one day when the crisis is averted. These deposits have, in my opinion, 6 characteristics. 1, they have to be found together as a group. Emergency coins are very often placed inside a container so that the depositor could have easy access to. You can retrieve them easily if they're like in a little pouch or something. 2, the deposit displays a full range of denominations that were in circulation at the time of the threat and were being used as functional currency. So it's not the save up, something that you save up for long, it's just what you had on that day when you decide to hide it as an emergency. The deposit may contain low and high value coins though, depending on the wealth of the owner. 3, the deposit shows a narrow date range as the owner took what was on hand at that time. 4, there is no evidence that certain coins were selected for certain types or emperors, because again, you take what is on hand. And so you have both new and worn coins that could be represented within that deposit. 5, the deposit was hidden with the aim of one day being recovered, and it might contain other personal items of value like gems or jewelry. And 6, an emergency deposit is always closed. No coins were added to it after its storage. It was often placed in a hidden location where it could not be found by outsiders, but easily retrieved by the owners or others who were sent to catch the deposit. Our 6th group are the deposits placed in the synagogue or its ruins after the building was destroyed. While coins for the magical religious deposits, which I will talk to you about in a minute, were brought in before the building was constructed, and the votive offerings, charity hoards, treasuries, or emergency hoards were deposited inside the building during its use as a ritual space, post-destruction offerings were placed in the building after its destruction or its partial destruction. Their specific function, however, is hard to tell. I could only find 2 examples of this within my group of deposits, and they're both from the same building, the synagogue at Horvat Rimon, where 2 pots full of coins were found buried in the upper layer of a burned down synagogue. Were they buried there as offerings, perhaps to protect the new building from another fire, or did they have another function? We don't know. The only prerequisite for this category is that they were placed in the building after its destruction in comparison to the other groups. And so now we have come to our last and biggest category, which I could give a whole presentation on its own for. It's a whole specific chapter in my dissertation. And these are the coins that seemingly had no specific function in the building and that were placed in spaces that were not accessible without having to take down half the building. So those are the ones inside the buildings and under the floor. And so the other categories make sense, right? You can think of, okay, why would money be in a building? Well, it's the savings, and it's used for ritual purpose, whatever. That all makes rational sense. This category is the most difficult and has been talked about by scholars the most, because we really don't know. Of our 57 deposits, 33 fall under this category. So I said I don't have the time or space here to explain all the research that I did on this category, but I did look at similar traditions of placing objects in or underneath foundation of sacred buildings in other neighboring civilizations, like in Mesopotamia or in Egypt or in ancient Greece. I also did research on Jewish magic, on traditions around the evil eye, and traditions of tithing and sacrifice after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And so for people who are interested in this part, I recommend going to my website where I've uploaded this entire dissertation, the link I will give you in a minute. The conclusion of all of my research, however, is that I believe that these particular coins were symbolic tithes taken out of economic circulation and set aside as sacred during late antiquity, and then added to the synagogue building during its construction as a way of giving back to God what belongs to God, simultaneously blessing the building and its visitors and protecting the building against natural or supernatural harm. These floor deposits arose in the second half of the 5th century CE and lasted until the end of the 7th century CE. And it was, in my opinion, the result of the collective commemorative attitudes towards the sacredness of the synagogue space and rabbinic halachic choices concerning tithing, sparked by particular groups in northern Galilee and the Golan. So that's a mouthful to say that I believe this phenomenon was centered around the Galilee specifically because Tiberias in the Galilee was the center of rabbinics at this point in late antiquity. As the temple in Jerusalem was now destroyed, people no longer had a place to bring their tithing coins or spend their tithing money in Jerusalem. However, according to biblical law and the rabbis, people were still obliged to set aside a bit of money each year as tithings that was destined for God. As the centuries passed, however, this 10% or tenth of your income became steadily replaced by a symbolic coin, just one coin to be taken from your savings each year and stored somewhere, not to be used again, earmarked as sacred. And some Jewish communities still do this. As the synagogue started to take over more and more of the functions of the former temple, though, in the 5th century CE, a process that we call imitatio templi, it must have felt reasonable that the synagogue space was an appropriate location to store these tithing coins. Thus, during construction or renovation of a local synagogue building, people had ample time to throw in their coin, simultaneously giving their tithes to God, but also consciously or unconsciously blessing the building, like we do now, throwing in coins into water, and blessing the building and maybe its future users and the visitors. As my research has shown, it was not uncommon to place magical objects inside the synagogue building to hope for a supernatural intervention. Amulets, human bones, magical writings, graffiti, all of these have been found hidden in synagogue buildings before. And coins, due to their mysterious symbols on them, their writing, and their material, different kinds of metals were often seen as having magical properties in antiquity, would make perfect objects utilized in what we would call magical religious practices. So there's a lot more that I could say. Unfortunately, I am limited in time here. However, I want to say again that you can read my entire dissertation as well as see images of all these deposits or download all the spreadsheets that I made of these deposits on this website that I made. And feel free to ask me any questions that you still have. And thank you very much.
Tina, thank you so much. Maybe we can go back to the not to share screen so that we can see each other. And I think it's really, I've seen you present over the years, and it's really great to see how much came out of this, how you started. And I think this fellowship, the center office, which actually gives you the first year and the 5th year free of any duties. You can only do your research or take your courses in the 5th year without anything else. I think it's really, it shows how much this helps further research. So I'm happy to, you can either type or raise your arm. We're not so many, so I think it should be easy. Just unmute yourself and ask a question. Patricia.
Thank you. That was really fascinating. I know you didn't have time to talk about it, but I'm a little curious about the Ostia and Sardis sites. You talked about them as diaspora deposits. Did you find any major differences there, or did they follow the same pattern?
So both the Ostia and the Sardis synagogues have deposits underneath the floor. The problem is that they have not been excavated the best, and they have definitely not been published the best. So I am in contact with the excavator of Sardis, Nick Carhill, and he just emailed me a couple of days ago that they're still going through all of the original notes that were taken and the diaries. And he already said, like, you make a couple of things that are we don't no longer believe this is true. So I'm planning to update my website or my database as I get more information over the years. But he says it's a big mess over there. But in both cases, there were hundreds of coins hidden under the mosaic floor, clearly meant to be kept that way. And so on the one hand, it shows that there was contact between the diaspora and Palestine because they do the exact same thing. So maybe someone visited someone and heard of that phenomena. We don't know how that went around. It's also very strange that it stayed within the Galilee in Israel and in the Golan. We don't have any in the south, but then it would go to the diaspora. So is it just coincidence or is something else going on here? I don't know.
Thank you.
Oh, and here's my cat. I know this is a very different topic than what the Jewish Center normally organizes. This has nothing to do with modern Jewry or anything, but I like my topic.
Miguel, go ahead.
Hi.
Hey, Miguel.
So, how are y'all? My question, Tina, is about those the kind of magical aspect of preserving these coins. I know you didn't want to talk too much about it because you didn't want to get too carried away. I'm sure I'm as you know what I study, so I'm certain there's a lot more to be said about all of that. But can you talk just a little bit about the different functions of similar deposits, if there are similar deposits, or to whatever extent there are similar deposits in Greco-Roman culture, and in particular, what are the functions of preserving coins in such a way?
Yeah, so the couple of examples that I found from ancient Greece come from mostly from literary sources. So apparently, these floor deposits have for a very long time been called foundation deposits. And foundation deposits exist in other cultures, in Mesopotamia and ancient Greece, and they are part of a foundation ritual. So before the construction of their temple or the sacred building, there would be a whole ritual with priests involved, and there would be different steps, and they would line out where the building would come, and then they would do offerings, and then they would sacrifice, and then they would say prayers. And very often they would put objects in the foundations before they start building construction to bless the building. And we know that in ancient Mesopotamia, they would put little statues or whatever. And the same in ancient Greece, we have texts that talk about how they would sprinkle precious metals or precious stones around that to build this construction. I have shown, I think, in my dissertation that what we have here is not the same phenomenon. They are not in the foundations. They are very close to the surface. So they are not all the way deep down as in other cultures. They're also not, for example, under the thresholds or in the corners. They are spread out as a carpet over the whole surface. So that seems to be different. So there seems to be, yes, on the one hand, a habit of putting objects underneath your building before you build it, but I don't think it's the same phenomenon here. I think it's a particular Jewish habit. That's why we don't have it in the temples that are in the same region from the same time period, and we don't have it under the churches. And so I think it's a Jewish phenomenon, and so that is why I was trying to figure out, well, maybe it's the tithing coins, or maybe they are the only ones who have this phenomenon that they still had to keep on doing. Does that answer your question at all? I got really a little bit lost on my tangent here.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's very interesting. I would love to talk more about this sometime. Thank you.
We'll see each other.
All right. I have another question. Yeah. Sorry. It's just really fascinating. So you had talked about differences in spaces, and some spaces are open, you could retrieve. I'm trying to imagine, how were the coins placed in non-open spaces if it wasn't done before the construction of the building? Do we have any sense of that?
No, you can't really. When the first Capernaum coins were found, someone thought they were emergency hoards or whatever, and then someone else said, well, it would make no sense at all that you take out these giant blocks. They are really, these floor stones are giant. Lift them with 10 people to put some coins underneath and then put the block back, or destroy a whole mosaic and put them in. So you can only do it during construction or like a big renovation where you put in a new floor. One of the synagogues have coins hidden behind the benches, but it's the benches that were added during this time period during renovations. So the building had already been standing there for a couple of 100 years when this phenomenon did not start yet. And then when they expanded it to make it bigger, they added more benches on the walls. And then we have the coin hoards behind it. So you can't really do it later on. Yeah, you can't.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'm curious because I remember you presented once and you showed us a map, and I mean that was how's the map of the coins? How much do you cover actually with the coins? From where to where, and from which time period do the coins reach? Just to give us an idea
for all deposits, or just to the floor deposits?
Just the yeah, maybe you start with the floor deposits with because 44,000, I imagine that would be too much to.
Well, so that's why I use the software, right? So the floor deposits start in the second half of the 5th century, which I think I have shown now, because of when the buildings were constructed, the pottery that goes with it in the stratigraphical layer, and then it ends in the 7th century because Islam comes in and they're just not building any new synagogues anymore. So I don't think it was a deliberate choice to stop doing it. It was just more coincidence. We don't have any synagogues from the 7th, 8th century. And then it was a matter of why in the second half of the 5th century, what was going on that all of a sudden you would start doing that. And then I have come up with a couple of reasons for why I think that time period was a good one. One of them was the growing belief that synagogues were replacements of the temple. It was sinking in that the temple wouldn't be rebuilt anytime soon, and slowly this synagogue was taking over functions that formerly the temple had. Like all of a sudden you could say certain prayers in synagogues that you couldn't before, the rabbi said that you could in the 5th century. It was also a time when Christianity was coming up more and more in the Galilee. They were now building all these, Jesus roads in the Galilee, and so the local Jewish community must have seen that the competition and seen how churches were seen as sacred spaces, and so synagogues also became more and more seen as that these are our sacred spaces, less of a community hall, but more as a religious building. And then there's some other reasons for why I think this time period could have caused the beginning of this phenomenon. Yeah. And then if you say all deposits, I mean, I didn't find any coin deposit in first century synagogues, but first century synagogues are very rare. We only have like 5 or 6 of them, and we have no coin deposits found in them. We don't have any second century synagogues. They didn't build synagogues in the second century. Why? We still don't know. And then when they start building synagogues in the 3rd century, and that is when, you know, it explodes with synagogues from then on, then we start having deposits for all kind of reasons placed inside the building, but on top of the floors. Yeah.
So I don't see anyone else, unless last chance to ask Tine and questions about 44,000 coins. And I think this is also part. I mean, that's what's fascinating about Jewish history and culture, that it has really. I mean, you can go into so many centuries. So I would not think this is different from. It is also part of Jewish history and culture. So. If not, then Tine, again, thank you so much. I hope we will see you more in the future. We see what's going on your website. And thank you everyone for coming here tonight and joining us in the Emerging Scholarship talk with Tine Rassal.
Thank you, Ruth. You want to announce our last, or your, now I no longer work for you, your next lectures?
Yeah, and then I hope to see many of you next week at the talk with Beth Berkowitz. And this will be a hybrid event. So I hope to see many of you in person. I'll be there in person, but there is also a Zoom option.